Well, that last episode of WandaVision definitely got us excited about what's to come, especially thanks to that long-rumored but finally confirmed introduction of Evan Peters as Quicksilver. What was up with that? Well, we're going to get into it and more as we delve into all the Easter eggs, especially the MCU ones that we spotted over the last 5 episodes. Well, at least as many as I can fit into a relatively short video. Let's start off with episode 1, which begins with an opening scene that is a very direct homage to the sitcom Bewitched, which ran from 1964 to 1972, and for a show about a literal witch and her beau, that's a great place to start for the romantic goings-on of Scarlet Witch and Vision. Early on, Wanda states that Vision has an indestructible head, which seems like a pretty dark joke about his death in Infinity War. Of course, episode 4 will bring this back around in an appropriately gruesome way. The calendar date for the work dinner, August 23rd, is seemingly a reference to the Vision-heavy issue 238 of The Avengers. In this ad, this Stark toaster is a dark reference to how Wanda and her brother Pietro remember Tony Stark and how his war profiteering affected their lives, thanks mainly to an unexploded bomb with the Stark Industries logo, seemingly mocking them for 2 days while they were trapped under rubble. This is just one of several ads now that target Wanda's past traumas, but we'll get into those in a bit. This traditional Sokovian greeting appears to be a sly reference to Scarlet Witch bewitching the Avengers in Age of Ultron, while this Maison du Mépris wine bottle is a pretty obvious reference to House of M, the comic miniseries most famous for featuring Scarlet Witch using her powers to shape the world around her. At the end of the episode, this logo for S.W.O.R.D. shows up in the monitoring room, which of course we'll later see in full as they enter the plot. In fact, we'll just kinda ignore the rest of the S.W.O.R.D. logos, seeing as they're now less Easter eggs and more just, the plot. We get them on clothes, on the drone-turned-toy helicopter, etc. Same goes for the S.W.O.R.D.-related tidbits like FBI agent Jimmy Woo calling through the radio. Sure, it's an Easter egg for those who saw Ant-Man and the Wasp at the time, but now it's just something that we get to delight in on a weekly basis. God, I just love Jimmy Woo so much. This brings us to the credits, which utilize a pixel effect that looks like how Scarlet Witch restructures reality in House of M. Gee, it's almost like that comic has some significance to the show. Now then, on to the second episode and a new decade of television. In this case, oddly enough, the show technically goes back in time a bit and opens with our couple in separate beds, a la I Love Lucy, and referencing the censorship of TV in the 1950s. The animated intro features images referencing Galactus, the Human Torch, and the aforementioned Tom King Vision series. Boba Milk is a clear reference to Wanda's nursemaid, a mutated cow, and potentially a reference to the Marvel Comics villain and nefarious witch, Agatha Harkness, with Auntie A's kitty litter, which supports a fan theory that Agnes is Agatha Harkness. In the comics, she's sometimes referred to as Auntie Agatha and even has a black cat named Ebony. Later on in episode 5, she'll even refer to herself as Auntie Agnes. The theory is bolstered by the fact that S.W.O.R.D., up to episode 5 at least, doesn't have a corresponding Westview resident for the role of Agnes. Emma Caulfield shows up in episode 2 as Dottie, and for fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, she sure is a sight for sore eyes. In the musical Buffy episode Once More with Feeling, her character Anya suggests bunnies, one of her irrational fears, could be responsible for the strange goings-on in Sunnydale. Since this episode, her only one to date, features bunnies in a pretty significant way, we can't help but assume this was all part of the plan. Speaking of those bunnies, there is some speculation that Senior Scratchy here is actually Nicholas Scratch, son of Agatha Harkness.
Senor Scratchy's got real star quality, don't you think?
It's a long shot and may just be an Easter egg, but all these little coincidences sure do seem to be adding up.
Oh, the devil's in the details, Bev.
That's not the only place he is.
That line could just be a throwaway use of an old aphorism, but seeing as how, along with Agatha Harkness, Mephisto is a common theory for the big bad behind the scenes, it could also be a hint as to what's to come. Seeing as Marvel's version of the devil was also a major component of Scarlet Witch rewriting reality to give herself children in the comics, children named Billy and Tommy, I should add, plus the fact that he's been teased in the trailer for Loki, chances are this is much more than just dropping a common saying. Meanwhile, this Strucker watch ad is a clear reference to Baron von Strucker, who experimented on Wanda and Pietro, thus giving them their powers. There's even a Hydra logo in case you missed the reference, something that's admittedly pretty easy for the movies-only crowd since Strucker is barely seen in the movies before he's killed off in Age of Ultron. Oh, and rather than the more common advertisement position of 1010, the watch is stuck at 242, and in Avengers number 242, Vision's body is repaired. This issue also features Monica Rambeau and Scarlet Witch. When the world turns to Technicolor at the end of episode 2, red is the first color we see turn from black and white. This seems like an obvious reference to Wanda's powers, which are always portrayed as red energy. If that's the case, it could be more important than you think that the show is so intent on tying her powers to that color. Now then, episode 3, aka the one where things start to get a tad weird. In this one, we've moved forward into a 70s style sitcom a la the Brady Bunch, but that's neither here nor there because, oh my god, she's ready to pop. Wanda's accelerated pregnancy is straight from the comics, where she's made pregnant through magical means. Billy and Tommy, as I already mentioned, are also straight from the comics, and through a whole series of complicated events, would eventually be reborn as actual human children and become the Young Avengers, Wiccan, and Speed.
All the world's a stage, all the men and women merely play.
Vision's Shakespeare quote seems to be suggesting a dark fate, a glorious return, or maybe both. He quotes the bard, but he doesn't provide the rest of the line. They have their exits and their entrances, perhaps suggesting that a character could wind up dying or being revived by the end of the show.
You didn't see that coming.
Seeing as how Quicksilver has now shown up, this prophecy may have already come true, but let's be honest. There are definitely more surprises to be had. It's Marvel. It's like their bread and butter, come on. Meanwhile, these cans of Simser paint are a pretty silly reference to storyboard artist Jeremy Simser. Hydra Soak appears to be a jokey reference to Agent Coulson's Season 4 conspiracy theory from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It could also suggest a retcon of Wanda's powers. Since mutants are now a viable part of the MCU, Find the Goddess Within suggests that Hydra's experiments didn't give Wanda and Pietro their powers, but merely unlocked a hidden mutant gene.
Gravity O's. Launch into your day the right way.
Monica Rambeau refers to her Gravity O cereal, which features little marshmallow moonmen. Clever, seeing as how she's a member of S.W.O.R.D. and has experience in spaceflight and with aliens. Of course, episode 3 also features our first direct reference to Ultron and Pietro, which will come into play in episode 4 when we get a look at the reality outside of Wanda's little playground. Wanda doesn't take kindly to Monica bringing up Pietro's death, which ties in with all of the repressed trauma being highlighted throughout these early episodes. Speaking of which, our last reference to S.W.O.R.D. is also shown here before the big reveal, with Monica wearing a S.W.O.R.D. logo on her necklace, a pretty clear indication of where her allegiances lie. The bubble dome thingy that is revealed to contain Westview at the end of episode 3, which we'll learn more about in episode 4, gives us a pretty big clue about where the show is going. See, it's blue. As I've mentioned earlier, Scarlet Witch's powers are pretty much always shown as red, suggesting this is not all her doing. The S.W.O.R.D. perimeter encampment, first seen at the end of this episode, could be a reference to a similar situation in Thor, there done by S.H.I.E.L.D. This suggests S.W.O.R.D. is the spiritual successor to S.H.I.E.L.D. and will play a larger role going forward. Episode 4 starts off with a very direct, far more disturbing flashback to the blip, which was previously seen in Far From Home. As Monica Rambeau is reforming, we get various voices spliced in as her mind reforms, including a brief clip of Captain Marvel calling Monica Lieutenant Trouble, calling back to her much younger self in that film and presumably one of the most defining moments of her life. Next up, Fantastic Four origins confirmed. Director Hayward mentioned that some space crew were still missing after the blip. Since we're definitely getting Marvel's first family in the not-too-distant future, and their origin has always been linked to a space mission gone wrong, perhaps we're setting up a new take on the Fantastic Four. This little memorial plaque does more than just drop a name from Captain Marvel. Photon is one of Monica Rambeau's superhero aliases in the comics, giving her mother's nickname even more significance. The town of Westview is revealed to be located in New Jersey, which could mean that WandaVision will set up another upcoming hero, Miss Marvel, otherwise known by her civilian name Kamala Khan, who considers herself New Jersey's protector. Also in the comics, Vision and Scarlet Witch moved to New Jersey to start their family. which I guess I should have started with that. Anyway, as shown in this scene, Jimmy Woo has learned the card tricks that he was fascinated by in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Of course, we also get the return of Darcy, who last showed up in Thor: The Dark World. She references
CMBR. That's
relic radiation dating back to the Big Bang.
This is the same energy of creation used in the comics as the source for the Fantastic Four's powers, and could maybe even be in reference to the Eternals, which of course got pushed back to a November release date. Now back to Jimmy Woo, his whiteboard references Skrulls. I get it, man. It's always Skrulls until you know the answer. Just ask the internet. We also finally get a proper horrifying Vision corpse reveal, directly referencing his horrific fate in Infinity War. Episode 5 is chock full of references, starting with the opening credits, which feature Wanda pre-powers in her war-torn homeland, minus one detail. There's no sign of her brother Pietro. We get our usual round of sitcom references here. The house looks more like the Keaton's house in Family Ties, and the opening credits reference that show's opening painting, complete with a similar font for the credits themselves and the zoom in to introduce each character. We also get an homage to Growing Pains' opening titles with the aforementioned photos of the characters growing up. There's also a brief shot taken from Full House. Ooh, that's a fancy fireplace thingy you got there. Sure looks familiar though. Vision's green plaid shirt here is a direct homage to his look in the Vision comics, which really, just read those comics, they're pretty sick. We learn early on that Wanda isn't technically Scarlet Witch just yet, since no one's given her a cool nickname, although Kevin Feige has stated that we will finally hear that name in this show. My guess, she's gonna become a straight-up villain in the end, and that mantle will signify her return to the side of evil. This would make sense, seeing as how we also get a line from Darcy just straight up laying down facts. Wanda Maximoff and Captain Marvel are the two most powerful Avengers, and Wanda could have easily defeated Thanos on her own given the opportunity. Since our big bad Thanos is no more, we need somebody to replace him who can really go toe-to-toe with all of the Avengers. I'm just saying, Scarlet Witch is the villain in Doctor Strange confirmed! Or not. Probably not, but maybe. And hey, is Monica Rambeau getting superpowers? That seed appears to have been planted since after her rude ejection from Westview, sword scientists are unable to conduct X-rays on her. In the comics, she has the ability to manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum. And what gives her these powers? Why, it's our old friend exposure to extra-dimensional energy. We also get a few references on this screen, including the common Pixar Easter egg A113, which could be referring to issue 113 of the Avengers comics, in which Wanda says she's going to make the world pay for Vision's death. Yikes. Then there's the hexagonal shape that's prevalent throughout the show, and even shows up in Hayward's office, which, foreshadowing maybe? And which gives inspiration to Darcy for the term the Hex. In the comics, Scarlet Witch's manipulations of the world around her are of course called hexes. Wanda stealing Vision's body references a deleted in-credit scene from Endgame as explained by Paul Bettany. It just didn't fit the film, which hard agree on that one, and has been repurposed for this particular program. And of course, it's also a comic book reference. We learn that the Sokovia Accords are still in effect, which may be not an Easter egg, but important nonetheless. Meanwhile, we get Sparky, Vision's synthezoid dog, showing up pre-synth. Oh, remember how Billy and Tommy eventually grow up, kinda, to become Wiccan and Speed? Well, they even wear their superhero colors in this episode. Look at those sharp-dressed boys. We also get this line.
I know an aerospace engineer who'd be up for this challenge.
You know who's an aerospace engineer in the comics? Reed Richards, baby! Woo! Fantastic Four, yeah! The episode's Lagos commercial is a reference to the instigating event in Captain America Civil War, wherein Wanda fails to stop Crossbone's suicide bombing in, well, Lagos. She wound up blamed for the tragic results, resulting in turn in the Sokovia Accords. More trauma as TV commercials. Vision is shown to be able to awaken people with a touch, a power shared by a girl named Layla Miller in House of M.
This will be your only warning.
Now near the end, we get the return of Wanda's Sokovian accent, since it seemed to disappear in Infinity War. Looks like her issues with control have been long in the making, and they're starting to break down. We get what appear to be the Growing Pains credits at the end as Wanda tries to turn attention away from the conversation with Vision, which is probably the most too many cooks this show has gotten thus far. Of course, this brings us right back around to that wild Quicksilver cameo at the end, which, I mean, holy cow, this almost definitely means the multiverse is very much real and very much getting crossed. There's no reason for Wanda to know about Evan Peters' version of the character, so it would appear that she's brought the Quicksilver from a separate reality, opening the door for all sorts of old characters turned new. This is history, people. And even though I set out to cover every Easter egg thus far, fact is this show is so chock full that I definitely skipped over a few, from sitcom callbacks to comic book tidbits and little visual motifs, and just yikes, it's exhausting. Yell at me in the comments and tell me what I missed and why I should feel ashamed for that.